You're mute, Rabbi.
Yep, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I was not trying to talk to anybody on Zoom. I was trying to talk to Jory. That's why I was muted. Okay, Andres, are you there?
Hello, everybody. Shabbat
Okay,
shalom.
so Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I want to welcome our cantor for this evening, Cantor Andres Levy. He is a cantor with a degree from the Latin American Rabbinical Seminary, Marshall T. Mayer, that's in Buenos Aires. And his cantorial credentials were revalidated at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. So he's got a double cantorial pedigree. He's a member of the Cantors Assembly, and he's got extensive experience and skills in leading religious services, weddings, and Jewish events all over the place, in Argentina, in Chile, in Latin America, in the USA. He's also led concerts of Jewish and international music all over the world. Now, he is in Buenos Aires, so it is 11:30 at night there. So let's, take that into consideration as we hear him tonight, and also, of course, coming through Zoom, which is not ideal, but I think it'll still sound wonderful. So we're going to begin with the song Mi Ha'ish, which you have the handout with the words in it. This song was actually the one that Prime Minister Rabin had in his pocket when he was shot. So it's a really beautiful song, and it has that extra layer of meaning to it. So Andres. I'd like to call up Lori Magnus. Oh, that's better. To light our candles, page 120 in the fatter books and page 2 in the thinner books. Okay. Yeah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu Lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
Now, Andres is going to lead us in the Kiddush, which is on page 122 and 4.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, אשר קידשנו במצוות ורצה בנו בשבת קודשו באהבה ברצון הנחילנו זיכרון למעשה בראשית כי הוא יום התחילה למקרא דקודש זכר ליציאה מצרים כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים בשבת קודשך באהבה ברצון הנחלתנו ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת
So I'm actually going to talk about next week's Torah portion for a reason that I'll tell you when I get to my sermon. The next week's Torah portion is called B'ha'alotcha, and it means when you mount the lamps or the menorah in the tent of meeting, the traveling tabernacle. And this is one of many instructions to the priests regarding how to run the rituals of the cult. The Eitz Chaim commentary asks, why does the Torah lay such emphasis on the menorah among all the furnishings of the tent of meeting? The Midrash responds with God's words, as I shined a light on Israel, making them conspicuous among the nations, let them shine a light on me. And the Eitz Chaim explains, God has no visible form. Only when Jews live by the values of the Torah do they embody what God stands for and make God manifest in the world. And that's God's light. Cantor Andres is going to lead us in the Lachadodi, page 138 and 20, and we will be doing verses 1, 2, and 9.
אותי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לכאן אותי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, בני שבת נקבלה. שמות וזכור בדיבורך, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשמו לתפארת בלי תהילה, לשמו לתפארת בלי תהילה. הקלותי לקריאת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. הקלותי לקריאת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, עם מקור הברכה. Shabbat nekabela, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hoy בשלום עטרת בלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמונם סגולה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה, בואי חלה. איך חלודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך חלודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, בני שבת נקבלה. One more time. לך חלודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך חלודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
Cantor Andres, that's one that you wrote yourself, right?
That's right.
Beautiful, beautiful music. Thank you. So our Torah portion, Bahalotecha, can mean when you cause the lights to ascend. Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib Alter of Ger, known as the Sefat Emet, a Hasidic Rebbe, suggests that raising the light symbolizes not only awakening consciousness, but also the arousal of spiritual power, a power originating from God. The high priest, serving as a stand-in for God, is responsible for keeping the lamps kindled. Rashi explains that to ascend means that the high priest must kindle the flame so that it ascends by itself without requiring frequent attention. And Rabbi Lawrence Kushner explains, this is because religious acts cannot be accomplished by one's personal strength alone, but rather through the power of performing a religious act. A spiritual power, the power of God, is awakened. It is this way with everything we do because God sets in each of us a holy spark. And by means of devotion and service, the spiritual power in the deed and the soul arouse in the person God's power and arouses the power in each other. Indeed, anything accomplished by human power alone, sooner or later, must stop. But when the power of the Holy One is awakened, this kind of power continues forever. The Chatzi Kaddish is page 263 and 145.
התגדל והתקדש שם רבה, ועל מה דיברה חילותי בימך מלכותי, בחייך אורו ביומי חול, וחיי כל בית ישראל. בהגלה, בהגלה, ובזמן קהרים, ואמרו רבה מבורך, לעולם רל מעל מיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ביפהר ביתרומם ויתנשא, ביתהר ויתהלל, ויתהלל, שם מלך ושם בריחו, אלא מכל מלכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה בנחמתה, תעמידם בהלמה, ואמרו אמן.
We rise for the Baruch Hu, the call to worship, on the next page.
da 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 da
Please be seated. And I'm going to read you a prayer that was written by Alden Solovey, because the first blessing before the Shema is a blessing about creation. And this is a lovely piece about creation. The divine in the world is what it's called. One you. Love is a bridge to the moment of creation. The moment when God's hearts could no longer be contained. When light exploded in a big bang, creating billions and billions of stars, millions and millions of galaxies, planets, moons, solar systems without number, and one, only one you. Yes, you are the impossible, yet here you are, miracle of love. The impossible, yet here you are, miracle of life. The impossible, yet here you are, miracle of God's loving hand and outstretched arm, created in the same instant that holiness, mercy, beauty, goodness, righteousness, and grace began to expand throughout the universe. And the second blessing is a blessing about revelation, about God revealing God's will to us through Torah. Ahavat Olam is page 266 and 148.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת. תורת ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו וחומנו נעשייה וכחוקך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ומצוותיך לעולם בהם. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגב יומם ולילה. ואבך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני ובעמו ישראל, ובעמו
We rise for the Shema on the next page.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Please be seated. And Carol Lee is going to lead us in the Ve'ahavta, which is on page 268 and 150.
Everyone, please join me. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha u'chol nafshecha u'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bom v'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech uvshochbecha uvkumecha ukshartam leod al yadecha v'hayu letotafot beinenecha Uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha Laman tiskaru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim lelohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher Hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem.
Thank you, Carol Lee.
My pleasure.
So poet Ruth Bryn offers a meditation on the journey the Israelites are taking in the wilderness, which is where our Torah portion, of course, takes place. It's called Moses, Moses. In your tent in the wilderness, did you not long to lie again, cradled in the princess's corruption, satisfied with royal sweets, a fondled foundling? Remember, Moses was found by the princess and grew up in the palace. In her royal suite, what manner of love did she teach you, little brother in Egypt? You left her couch for rocks and sand, for vultures circling in the hot sun, for some distant oasis where the gardens were not too lush, nor the slaves too willing, nor the rulers too rich. Egypt we know well, and the wasteland is often our home, but your promised land, Moses, does anyone ever enter it? From the painted glance of the princess, her priestess's soul, stately and cruel, from the forests of painted columns and the statue of the god the sun could never reach, from the woven and colored linen, the barges floated down the Nile, the quail roasted with garlic and leeks, from the cunning craft and clever skills that let us deed delicacies to the silent dead. You, Moses, delivered us, cursed us with conscience, burdened us with identity, blessed us with eyes that looked from Nebo, but left us with feet that have not entered. As you may remember, Moses died on Mount Nebo without entering the promised land, the end of the Torah being that we never entered, which is kind of a statement about what life is all about. You never quite get there, but there's always a promised land ahead to look for. And speaking of the promised land, after we left slavery in Egypt, we were so thrilled by what God did for us by splitting the sea that we sang the Mi Chamocha, page 270 and 152.
כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אליך. מי כמוך בלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אליך. מלכות תגרמה עליך אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אליך. ונאמר כפרה אדוני את יעקב, וגלום יחסק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אליך. די 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 די
So as you probably know, the Israelites began complaining the minute they left Egypt. Now, what were they complaining about? I told people this wonderful joke I heard, the only one I can ever remember. A bunch of Jews are sitting at a restaurant and the waiter comes over and says, "Is anything okay?" So we started this a long time ago. So they said they were complaining about, oh, they missed the melons and the cucumbers and all the great stuff they had to eat in Egypt. I'm sure they were really well fed as slaves. Sforno, the Italian commentator, explains, the people took to complaining about the harshness of the journey, but they weren't really complaining in their hearts, for they had no legitimate reason to complain. But they complained with their words just to test God. Why? Rashi suggests that they were seeking a pretext so they could separate themselves from God. The great 15th century Spanish commentator, Rabbi Isaac Arama, suggests that in this first complaint, there were no words at all. Only afterwards, when they brought their complaints into the form of words, did they express them as a longing for meat. But they did not really long for meat or anything else. They simply longed for longing's sake, just complaining for the sake of complaining, right? As Rabbi David Kasher explains, the people are experiencing an existential crisis, a kind of great sadness that is simply part of the human condition. Often we try to drive away that sadness with physical distractions. So what's the solution? The problem with our lusts is not the physical pleasure itself, it's the attempt to cure physical medicine. it's the attempt to use physical medicine to cure a spiritual malady. We will never cure our deepest longings with food or sex, fancy clothes or big houses. It works the other way, suggests Maor Vashemesh, another Hasidic commentator. Instead, we bring our spirituality into our physical lives. Our enjoyment of life is enhanced by the quality of our consciousness. So the problem is not what is outside of us or of the Israelites. The problem is what's inside. And so the solution is never going to be found out there in the desert. The solution is within. Hashkivenu is on page 271 and 153.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leShalom v'hamidenu Malkeinu leShalom. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leShalom v'hamidenu Shalem reinu lechaim. ושמור עלינו סוכת שלומך ותקנו וצבא מלפניך. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. ברוך אתה אדוני הפורס סוכת השלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים ועל ירושלים ועל ירושלים.
Since our Torah portion is about light, I thought I'd read this piece by Alden Solvey called Inside the Light. A rainbow shines inside the light. If you could be the dewdrop, you would forever see it. Stillness waits inside the light. If you could be the sky, you would forever feel it. The sunrise dawns inside the light. If you could be the horizon, you would forever find it. Freedom flows inside the light. If you could be the wind, you would forever ride it. Beauty rises inside the light. If you could be the sparrow, you would forever reach it. Mystery pulses inside the light. If you could be the wonder, you would forever know it. Majesty reigns inside the light. If you could be the wisdom, you would forever sense it. Faith rests inside the light. If you could be the eagle, you would forever hold it. Your soul glows inside the light. If you could be yourself, you would never leave it. The Shamru. We observe Shabbat, page 272 and 154.
שמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת, לדור אותם ברית עולם.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
We rise for the tefillah, pages 274 and 156.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, אלוהי אברהם ליצחק אלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה. האל הגדול הגיבור ונורא האל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וסוחר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, מלך עושר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ושרת שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיה כל מתים אתה והרב להושיע מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיה כל מתים ברחמים רבים, צומח נופלים רופא חולים ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני העפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורת מדום מלך המלך מנית, ומכן עצמי ישוע ומנעת לחיות הכל מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה כל המתים. אתה קדוש בשמך קדוש וקדושים בכל יום, יללו חסלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Please continue silently to page 282 or 164. Be seated whenever you're done or whenever you need to. Page 285 and 167.
עושה שלום
I was laughing because when he said, "Yeah, say shalom," Carol Lee was going like that every time. It was really cute. So we take a moment to now think of those who are in need of healing, whether of body, of mind, or of spirit. We think of congregants and friends and family of congregants: Jonathan Davidson, Ben Henderson, Kara Gilman, Rabbi Steve Robbins, Gloria Mangus, Leslie Ferris, Pamela Mangus, Johnny Sikat, Larry Miller, Martha Miller, Judy Richmond, Fernando Guerrero, Ann Craven, Marvin Young, Chava Bat Avraham Sarah, Bert Harbour. If you'd like to add a name, please do so as I look around the room. Look at Zoom. Sandy Landis, Robin Kurland, Alan Edelman, Ruth Barrett, Leslie Redmond, Amy Morton, Ron Brazil and Ron Jones, Leo Schmidt, John Cruz, Judy Dunbar, Steve Nielsen, Patty Podner, Alicia Harada. Anyone else?
Gary Grant.
And please join us in the Misha Berach, the prayer for healing, which is on page 371 and 253.
May the source of rain, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say bless those trees of healing with refuah.
So I decided that I wanted to share with you my senior sermon from seminary, which was almost 20 years ago. And you may notice that I've changed a bit since these days. And it was actually on a different Torah portion, but with the same complaints by the Israelites. So it was Bishalach, which is right after they, get out of Egypt, cross the sea, and they start complaining right away, and then they complain some more. So this is what I said in those days. I actually had written a piece for Reform Judaism magazine based on this. That doesn't exist anymore. But then 9 years later, I wrote an update because I did change. But this is what my experience was at Hebrew Union College back in the day. I was very different from most of the other students. They were very frum in those days. So this is what I said. I'm standing in a room full of people I respect. I look around and see dedicated and thoughtful faces, yet I feel separate and alone. Sometimes we have animated discussions about God and Judaism. We argue about particularism and universalism, about kashrut and community, and I feel separate and alone. Here I am at Hebrew Union College, the institution that has brought me back to life. I study with the future leaders of the Jewish community who really care about the brokenness of the world as I do, yet I feel separate and alone. Every week, I walk into services surrounded by flowing talitot, colorful kippot, and skin-binding tefillin, which you don't wear on Shabbat, but you wear during the week. I'm wearing none of these. As the cantor chants, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, bodies bend over in reverence. I merely nod my head in respect. As the soaring music of Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh fills the room, heels go up 3 times as worshipers reach for the angels. My feet stand firmly planted on the ground. The Torah is carried around the room and hands and sidurim reach for contact and are kissed. I nod my head in respect. And I start to wonder, am I authentic? Do I belong here? I'm struggling for legitimacy. I miss the Judaism of yesteryear, the Judaism that I knew growing up. I dare not utter it except in a whisper, I miss the C word. Yes, I miss classical reform. Well, not every aspect of classical reform, but this longing places me on the fringe. And being an outsider is always a lonely place. Classical reform is from the very early days when a lot of the rituals and, the mitzvot dealing with ritual matters were jettisoned, and nobody wore these. I went to Temple Emmanuel. They asked you to take your hat off if you wore a kippah. So I think that the Torah portion for this week is an apt metaphor for my relationship to today's more traditional reform movement. The Israelites have been liberated from bondage in Egypt, but they complain bitterly about their newfound freedom. They miss the life they knew in Egypt, those delicious melons, cucumbers, and flesh pots. And of course, this makes Moses angry. He doesn't get it. Why would these people want to go back to hard labor and humiliation? Sometimes it feels like people see me as the Israelite grumbling for a past that today's leaders of reform would rather disown. Here they are moving their congregations away from the shackles of classical reform, and here I come moaning for the past. Well, what are these flesh pots that tempt me so? Services from the Union Prayer Book, conducted in English with organ and choir, without a kippah and without a talit? No. What cucumbers does my palate crave? The Hanukkah bushes? The Treifa banquets? The cathedrals in space? Again, no. What are the melons that smell so sweet to me? The confirmations replacing the B'nai Mitzvah? The high holiday Jews? No, that is not the kind of Judaism I want to return to. But there are some elements of classical reform that I would like to retrieve. Before I go into details, though, I think it's important for me to explain why I reject the trend towards traditionalism that has been taking place in our movement. Why I don't find it satisfying to daven the traditional prayers to observe the full array of holidays, and to guide my life according to as many mitzvot as possible. Why I bristle when people speak about a personal God before whom they bow, whose providence for humankind is a given. And why I'm sometimes as intolerant of traditionalism as I feel others are about my approach to Judaism. So I'm going to tell you my story, much of which you probably already know here. My mother was a survivor of Auschwitz. In that death camp, she lost her innocence and her family. This awareness has always been at the forefront of my consciousness. Therefore, I do not see a providential God in action, nor do I buy the reasoning that places the blame on humankind. Because if God is so smart, why didn't God come up with a better blueprint for giving us free will? Aside from my mother's tragedy, I see too many innocent people suffering around the world. Doe-eyed children starving in refugee camps or working for a pittance in unsafe and unsanitary conditions 14 hours a day. Abused children here at home. I could go on, but you know the details. The point is that were I to believe in a God who loved humanity, a God who created the world as it is, I would spend my time and energy being very, very angry. And I spent many years in just such a state of mind. I prefer to use my energy more constructively. The only God image that resonates with me is that of Mordecai Kaplan, who calls God the force of good in the world, the force that allows you and me to be better people and to make the world a better place. Kaplan has been criticized for not sufficiently addressing the problem of evil, but I leave that conundrum to those who believe that God is all good and all powerful. Theology leads me to practice. If God is the force of good, and I am made B'Tselem Elohim in God's image, then I must go out into the world and do good. As Leo Beck puts it, in Judaism, love of God is never a mere feeling. It belongs to the sphere of ethical action. One of the key losses from classical reform, something I really do want to bring back, is not the hymnal or the organ, but the primacy of social justice. I feel as though in our concern for retrieving the traditions of the past, we have lost a sense of how to reach out to the larger community, how to bring our Jewish values to bear on the ills that cry out at us every day. I care about the Jewish people, but I also care about the non-Jew. And because I care about the non-Jew, I need to limit my particularism. I miss classical reform's commitment to universalism. I also want to be part of the larger society so I can remain in fellowship with others. If I were to observe kashrut, I could not eat comfortably at my sister's homes, nor at the homes of my friends. They're non-Jews and non-observant Jews alike. One student told us in class last year that she liked to go to kosher restaurants and kosher markets so she could run into other friends who keep kosher. My response was that I like to go to non-kosher restaurants and non-kosher markets so that I can run into everyone else. If I were traditionally observant, I would be part of an observant community. But what would happen to the rest of my communities? My friends from different walks of life, my family, and my family is fully Jewish. I feel the classical reform allowed me to walk the tightrope between particularism and universalism. But in today's reform, I feel like the rope is giving way and I'm hanging on with my pinky. On a purely personal level, I do not resonate to many traditional practices. I did give up eating treif a few years ago, and it's not really made me more aware of my food. And I don't think that God cares if I eat kitniot, legumes, during Passover. I don't feel comfortable putting on a lot of religious garb. Kissing the Torah feels idolatrous to me. Davening the same exact prayer every day bores me. Musical instruments in shul help me to raise my spiritual level, as do interpretive prayers. I reject the argument that you make of services what you will. I think the rabbi and the cantor have a responsibility to offer a service to which people can respond. I don't miss classical reform services conducted in English, but I do miss expressing prayers that do make sense to me. I know that Mechaye Hametim, which means who brings the dead back to life, can be taken metaphorically, but that was not the original intent. Mechaye HaKol, which means makes everything live, encompasses the metaphoric meaning without expressing something in which I do not believe. The Aleinu, which I don't know if all of you know what the Aleinu really is about, it's about our being very special people. It bothers me a lot because no matter how we rationalize it, it is about chosenness, either in the sense of being God's select people or in the sense of having a special moral destiny. And I find that to be condescending to other groups. What really grounds me in my Judaism is not so much prayer and ritual, though a good service will connect me to the Jewish people historically, geographically, and spiritually. What grounds me in my Judaism, aside from social justice, is the study of text. Text study for me is exciting because Torah incorporates endless meanings. And I believe that life is about ambiguity and multifaceted truth. Torah also models ethical behavior while acknowledging the difficulties inherent in the moral path. And as Pirkei Avot tells us, God can be found when two or more people struggle with a text together, seeking wisdom as they confront each other's reality. I was tempted to begin my sermon as another student did last year. He opened by stating that a friend of his was in the closet, fearing the reaction of her colleagues. After a few moments of suspense, he revealed that this friend was a Republican. I would simply have replaced Republican with classical Reform Jew. As those who have studied with me over the past 6 years know all too well, I'm pretty outspoken about my views. So I'm definitely not in the closet. But sometimes I feel like I should be. It's definitely isolating to make an occasional statement harking back to classical reform and see the stunned looks of my classmates. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a dinosaur that belongs back in the dark ages of classical reform. But I'm living now, and I must develop more faith in my own path. It helps me a lot when I find like-minded souls. But it would also help if we could enter into dialogue and explore what lessons we can learn from our classical reform forefathers. For my part, I will need to let go of my own defensiveness and intolerance. Struggle as I might, I confess that I'm not always as open-minded as I'd like to be. Just as I'm asking for my place in this project called Judaism, so too I must be willing to give others their place. So I hope this can be the beginning of a fruitful conversation about faith and God and community, an opportunity for all of us to dig a little deeper and examine our beliefs. Organs and hymns are perhaps indeed the flesh pots of Egypt, which are better left behind. What I really appreciate is the manna of the desert. According to a midrash, the manna tasted like what each person needed. To me, that manna is a sweet dish of social justice mixed with rationality, sprinkled with a dash of particularism, and several good shakes of universalism. Would you like a taste? So I obviously have evolved since then. I do wear the garb. I do bow. And the reason I do is that when I was up in Oakland, the rabbi who was a senior rabbi, Steve Chester, was very similar to me in terms of theology, and he used to bow. And I said, gee, why are you bowing? He said, well, it helps me feel more humble. That made sense to me finally, right? I do get on my tippy toes for the kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. So I have, evolved in certain ways, but I still think universalism is important. And I don't like the idea that, let's get more and more into our own people and not reach out to others. And I don't like the idea of, only hanging out with people who keep kosher, because there are a lot of other people out there. Now, I don't eat treif. I did preserve that. But, if I kept kosher plates and all of that, I know some people do that and they're able to have friends over, but a lot of times they're not, or they're not able to eat elsewhere. So that's my confessional for the My intolerance has not gotten a whole lot better, unfortunately, but there's always many years ahead in the promised land, way ahead for me to look towards. So Jason Winston from our board is going to make a few very brief announcements because it's summertime.
I got bad news if you wanted a few. I got one. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So what I have to share with you is that we will be switching our summer Shabbat services on Fridays to 7 p.m., but starting in July. We're trying a slightly different time, and we're going to host potluck onegs with different themes each week. And starting July 8th, the first theme will be Bring Your Favorite Cookie. And if you have any questions about onegs, Wendy is there and she will be glad to answer them, I'm sure. And other than that, thank you, Cantor Levy, for joining us tonight. Beautiful sound, beautiful music. Thank you. Okay, apparently we are aiming for an August 12th outdoor service and dinner. So mark your calendars later and you'll try to remember that. And anyone else have anything they wanted to? All right, Shabbat Shalom.
And actually, I'm going to be gone for the next 6 weeks, but we have a bunch of people filling in for me, luckily. So I'm sure the services will be lovely. Yes, I would like to also thank Cantor Andres Levy for spectacularly beautiful music. I hope you looked at the chat because you have gotten incredible notices, reviews. And we've really, really enjoyed having you tonight. What time is it? Yeah, I better hurry up because the poor guy is it's like almost 12 o'clock there, right? No, it's almost 1. Gee, okay.
Don't worry.
Enough. All right. Aleinu. Why don't we have Elliot and Amy open the ark? No, I was going to ask you to sing the Aleinu just to open the ark. Okay. And we rise, and the Aleinu is on the inside cover. And by the way, Wendy, thank you for doing the onegs every week. And thank you. I think Ezra is doing security tonight. Thank you for doing that as well.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות העמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל עמונם. אנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לבני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ביוסף טרף, ובשם יקרוב השמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובי מרומים. יהיו אלוהינו הינון, אמת מלכנו אפת זולתו, כתבתו ותורתו, ואתה היום בהשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחתינו. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
And we take a moment to think of those who are no longer with us. We're observing Shloshim for Earl Castellos, husband of Lila Basham Castellos. And is anyone here in Shiva Shloshim or the first year of mourning who would like to mention a name? Okay, Edith Tanizaki, first year. Ruth Landis, first year. Judith Cohen, first 30 days, first year. Elena Archibek Farris. Harold Altman, first year. Stan Walkman and Joan Heslin, first year. Saul Eppelbaum, first year. And we're observing yard sites this Shabbat for Harold Nathan Marcus, Irene Sherman, Sylvia Elkin, Joseph Cohen, Mary Ann Dunsavage, Blanche Urbach, Ray Freed, Henrietta Appleton, Robert Homa, Garth Aiken, Ida Kaplan, Rosetta Fields, Morris Zagorski, Ruby Cowan, Samuel Hosh, Julius Finkel, Inez Neiman. Anyone else observing a yard site? Anybody on Zoom observing a yard site? Please join me in the Mourner's Kaddish, which can be found on page 598 and 294. And I think there are a lot of people on Zoom tonight, so maybe better not to unmute, but please join us. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma divrach hechutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'v'zman kariv, imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam u'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudashah b'richu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran de'alma de'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael de'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Huya aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, imru, amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, as together we say, amen. Our closing song is Ma Gadlu. It's on your handouts if you want to join in. So since we have a special motzi here, I'm going to do it. Here we go. Please join me. No. What do you mean? Hamotz lechem min haaretz. We give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom. Please join us for the oneg, and people on Zoom, if you want to continue to chat with each other, you're more than welcome to do that. Thank you again to Cantor Andres for a wonderful service.
Shabbat shalom.
And
Hey,
thank you for
Shabbat
being up so
shalom.
late.
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, Cantor. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Cantor.
Thank you. That
Thank
was
you.
lovely.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Nice-
you. It really
nice
was
singing with
lovely.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tada, tada rabba.